Hey, good evening, everybody. Welcome to Adam Makes Beer. My name is Adam, and today is on my notes it says the April Industry Pro interview. Clearly, that's a little bit dated, but this is actually the August, even though it's September 1st. We had to work out some scheduling stuff, but this is our sit down with Cole Hackbarth, Director of Brewing Ops from Rhinegeist. Super excited about tonight's conversation. We're going to be digging into scaling a brewery into kind of a regional player, some of the things that goes into that. It'll be a good lens into some stuff that we haven't really talked about yet on the show, on the podcast, and then we're going to dig into Oktoberfest as well. So it is that time of year. Those beautiful amber color lagers are starting to fly around, maybe even some paler ones. So we'll be digging into that style. But before we get into that, I'd like to mention our wonderful sponsor, Blickman Engineering. Blickman Engineering has been the pioneer of nano brewing, and they have helped hundreds of successful breweries achieve their dreams since they started with one barrel systems in 2006. Now offering a full suite of brew houses up to 15 barrels skidded and insulated, matching cellaring equipment, keg washers, grain mills, and more, sized specifically for the nano brewer. Blickman Pro brewing systems are competitively priced without sacrificing quality, and the simple design and factory direct support from our brewing experts get you up and running faster than anything else on the market. When you're ready to go pro or just kicking the tires, be sure to reach out to them for expert advice and a partner to help you through it all. Turn your dreams into a reality by reaching out to Phil, Tom, or Josh at probrewing@blickmanengineering.com. Again, that's probrewing@blickmanengineering.com. Blickman Engineering Pro Brewing is proud to be the equipment sponsor for this channel and is committed to helping every brewer, no matter where they are in their journey. So Cole, man, welcome to the show. Good to talk to you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Adam.
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, you are Director of Brewing Ops at Rhinegeist. And how long have you been with the company?
Almost 9 years.
9 years now. Man, that flies. I don't have to tell you that flies by.
No, it flies by, yeah.
You guys hired a guy that was working for me. I was brewing up in Michigan at the time, and I had a guy that was looking for some other opportunities, and he said, "Yeah, I'm talking to someplace in Cincinnati." And so he was early on, I believe, getting down there. I think, were you guys running a 15-barrel brew house at the time?
It was a 20.
A 20
that we scaled into a 40 with some high gravity and an oversized mash lauter ton.
Sure. So yeah, he was in on early days, and a lot has definitely happened since then. So let's jump into a little bit of your path into the brewing industry. How did you end up getting into the field, Cole?
So it goes all the way back to college. I was a psych major at Oregon State because when you graduate high school, you go to college.
Sure.
Psychology sounded interesting. It wasn't. Fortunately, I got a campus job, and one of the dudes I was working with was in the fermentation science program, which is part of the food science department out there. And so when I started talking to him, and I learned that you could get a bachelor's degree in brewing and actually make a career, like a legitimate job out of it. I'd done some home brewing, and growing up in the Pacific Northwest, I was well aware of craft beer by that time, but it had never really clicked that you could do it for a living.
Sure.
So I immediately abandoned psychology, joined the food science department, and started studying all things beer, wine, cheese, fermented, stuff. And then, from there, just kind of jumped into craft beer. Started my career formally at Full Sail Brewing, which is out in Hood River, Oregon. At the time, I want to say they were top 15 in the country by volume.
Sure.
This was mid 2000s, 2006. Yeah, that kind of from there got into the pub scene in Portland. Did that for a bit. It's a lot of work. Not that production brewing isn't a lot of work, but brew pubbing, was just kind of solitary. You're on your own, doing your own thing. And I really kind of enjoyed team environments and seeing how all the big scale pieces go together. So from there, I kind of popped back into the production side of things by moving down to Los Angeles and helping to open Golden Road. This was 2011. And then, Golden Road was maybe the 5th brewery in LA at the time.
Okay.
So 5 breweries in a metro area of 20 million people. It was pretty crazy. The growth was insane, and that place was a rocket ship. And that really taught me a lot about production brewing, about automation, maintenance, packaging, engineering, all of the things that go into building a modern brewery, as well as training and growing teams of people to keep up with all that. Ultimately, though, Los Angeles wasn't for me. Being a realist with a brewer's salary, I was never going to be able to afford a house out there because I'm not independently wealthy. So started poking my head around to see what else was going on. Fortunately, I had worked with one of the founders of Rhinegeist, Bryant, out at Golden Road. He was one of the first sales guys out there before leaving to go start Rhinegeist. So I heard they were doing some crazy stuff, and Cincinnati was a hot young craft beer scene. So I kind of shot him a note, said, "Hey man, I've done this scaling a regional thing. Let me know if you want my help." It's like after a couple of beers late on a Saturday night, I sent him this email. He called me early the next morning. It was right after FOBAB. His car got impounded because he parked in the wrong place, and it was like just chaos. But he called me. He was like, "Yeah, man, I can't get you out here fast enough." They flew me out, and 2 weeks later, I kind of met the team, met everybody, saw what they were, what was going on and what Cincinnati was all about. Granted, this was December in Cincinnati, so it was 20 degrees and snowing, and
Sure.
but it had a cool feel to it, and it seemed like a good spot. So early January 2015, I came out, joined the Rhinegeist team. At the time, they were doing about 10,000 barrels in their second year.
It's already a lot of beer.
Yeah, it was. And then from there, like I said, it was a 20 barrel that they'd put on steroids to brew high gravity 40s. And they'd already had on the way a 60 barrel BrauCon, which showed up 3 months after I arrived. And then from there it was, off to the races.
Absolutely, man.
It was.
I feel like I might be getting. We had some feedback before when we were talking. Is there any chance that do you have some headphones that maybe you could plug in? And if not, it's no big deal. But I'm getting. I don't know if you guys can hear it. I don't know if it's just me. But I'm just concerned that when I'm talking, I'm getting feedback on your side. If you don't have headphones, we'll just run it. It's no big deal.
I don't have any close.
Nothing. No, don't sweat it. Don't sweat it.
Okay.
So that's cool. And then that 60 barrel system rolling in, man, that's shooting for the moon right off the get go. So just from a personal experience being in the industry, what is, I use the term Simon Sinek does a lot of leadership talk stuff, and he talks about, what's the thing that when you walk out the door at the end of the day, you said, I would have done that for free. What's that? And maybe not as literally as that, but what's that thing that really keeps you coming back? Like, what's that? I don't know, like that real passionate drive thing that keeps you coming back.
Other than the beer, of course.
Sure.
I think it's the team and the people.
Yeah.
Craft beer is a cool industry because people want to be in it. Sure. You're not, some people are making a lot of money. Most people are not. Most people are in it because they're passionate about beer and they love craft beer, and, they're just happy to be doing it for a living. So it makes it a really fun environment to be in, and, really cool people to work with because they're not driven by money or, fame and fortune. It's just
sure.
a shared passion for the craft.
Yeah. And I kind of thought, like, listening to you talk before, it is interesting because this was my first week at Sonder, and this is the first time they have a team of 6-7 people in the brewery. And so this is the first time I have that number of people to be working with. And it's one of the interesting things is I walked in and the culture was awesome, man. Everybody is working really hard together. They're picking up the slack for each other. And that's that thing that's great, man. It's going in, having that high morale, have people wanting to learn, wanting to grow. That it is the most rewarding thing. And yeah, the beer side is great. You know what I mean? That's that. But at this point in my career, that's almost the cherry on top. It's actually it's that, and not to sound hokey, but it really is those interactions with people. That is where it's at. So. No, man, that's cool. So yeah, we kind of started getting into the story here of Rhinegeist kind of hitting and then going big really, really fast. I remember when I got in, I think a lot of people felt like that was going to happen. You know what I mean? They built my first place was a 15-barrel brewery, tons of fermentation space, a huge bottling line at the time because it was bottles back then. And you're gonna put bottles in Michigan. In Michigan, you're gonna put bottles in Meyer, and you're gonna take over the world and become the next founders, right?
Yep.
But I think a lot of people ended up overbuying. You know what I mean? After getting some years under my belt, I started walking into breweries that were just starting up and saying, "Oh no, you spent so much money on stuff that you may never need, period." Or at least won't need for a long time. You know what I mean? And it puts a lot of people behind the 8 ball. It's a tricky thing to blow something like that up. Can you speak to that a little bit about that path of creating a regional brewery? Obviously, it's making a lot of beer, and there's going to be a lot of people doing it. But what are maybe some of the things that people don't understand from the outside, looking into something like that?
Yeah, there's so many things. And, creating a regional brewery and then creating Rhinegeist, two different things.
Sure.
Going from 0 to 100,000 barrels a year in 5 years is insanity. It was lightning in a bottle. There's building and scaling a brewery, and then there's that.
Sure.
But I think a big part of why we were successful was knowing what's coming and being prepared for the future. A lot of people, when they start breweries, obviously they're in it for the long haul, right? So you're not necessarily building a brewery and then getting out and then starting another one and then getting out. You don't get a ton of reps on a brewery startup usually. Having been through Golden Road and then jumping into Rhinegeist was kind of a unique perspective and a unique education for me, because I got to see how to do it quick. What are the problems that you're going to have when you scale beer as fast as we did? How do you need to build a team? What kind of resources do you need, from brewing to packaging to maintenance? What kind of engineering and equipment do you need or not need? So I kind of got a dry run at that. And then getting dropped into Rhinegeist was essentially, all right, take all the stuff you learned over the last 4 years and do it again, knowing what you know now. So that was just a really great opportunity to take the reins in production and just kind of run with it. Knowing that at 10,000 barrels, you don't need a brewery engineer and you don't need a maintenance team. But at 30,000 barrels, you absolutely need those. So you hire those people when you're at 10,000 because you're headed towards 30, towards 50, towards 100. And same with equipment. When I got there, we were running on a 5-head cask, which we had one at Golden Road. We had run it into the ground and resurrected it several times before we upgraded to a rotary machine out of Italy from CFT. So when I got to Rhinegeist and they were like, oh yeah, we did the math on this, it'll get us to 30,000 barrels and, we're good. Don't worry about packaging. I laughed and I was like, yeah, this thing's going to be dead in 6 months. We need to fast track a high speed rotary. This just isn't going to make it. And yeah, sure enough, that summer, we were running the thing around the clock and it was on life support the whole time. And I called my buddy at CFT and was like, hey man, can I jump the line? Get me whatever machine you can as fast as possible. And, let's fast track that thing out here. So, it's kind of knowing those kinds of things and being prepared for it. Scaling recipes is a big thing. When you go from at Golden Road, it was a 2-vessel 15-barrel Premier up to a fully automated 4-vessel 50-barrel Braucon, and then we jumped in at Rhinegeist. It was a JV 20-barrel, and then a 60-barrel Braucon. It took one batch, and we were fully scaled. Truth was flavor matched, and we were off to the races. So it's just having that experience, and essentially I got the cheat codes when I walked into Rhinegeist. I already had them. And then from there, it's just building teams and, leading people and making sure your team feels valued. It isn't just about the growth. It isn't just about making money. It's about, quality and consistency and maintaining the passion and the craft and the reason we're all here.
Sure. We talk about that a lot here where it's like, ultimately like all this stuff is it's about developing your people. You know what I mean? And it goes beyond just like, it can't just be your words. You know what I mean? Like you actually have to show people, right? Like I can tell you, hey, Cole, I value you. But if I'm not showing you that I'm valuing you, those words become cheap pretty quick, right? And people sniff that stuff out. Just a quick note, Core Glitch in the chat loves crumb cake. So tip of the hat for that.
Nice, thank you.
But yeah. And
coming back this winter, there's going to be a little splash of it. So keep an eye.
Beautiful. Can you give us just kind of a quick overhead view of what that beer is?
So that actually came out of our brewer series. One of our brewers named Dylan, he kind of developed that recipe. It's a red ale with coffee and lactose and cinnamon and vanilla. It's just kind of a winter holiday in a glass and just kind of rich and warm and smooth and delicious.
Yeah, awesome. So, I mean, big picture, we've been getting into we've been discussing the scaling element of it and everything like that. But, something that also really goes hand in hand with this is it's kind of a two-prong thing where one, when you're doing something like this, marketing is always important, but marketing is obviously very important when you're doing something on that scale, because we're not talking about marketing for a neighborhood pub. That's a completely different animal. You know what I mean? You're doing something obviously on a much larger scale. And then there's a twin element to it where I'm going to tell a little story about my cousin. And I love her. We'll get that out of the way first. But I remember when we were young and we were like college age or something, and she used to be into Dave Matthews. It was the 90s. You know what I mean? You're into Dave Matthews. Yeah. So, but she liked Dave before he got popular. And so the next summer when I went back out, she didn't like Dave Matthews anymore because he was a sellout. And all that means is that he was successful. I don't. Can you talk to that marketing element? And sometimes what I think is a strange offshoot or a strange happening in our industry. I know there's been some people, because obviously Founders is huge, and as Founders was scaling, there would be, and they might be a little bit more on the beer nerdy side of the spectrum. You know what I mean? Like maybe a very small percentage of the folks out there, but some people don't like when their local brewery gets big. You know what I mean? It's almost like this Dave Matthews effect, right? Where you're like, listen, and it's weird because it's almost like people love the concept of local so much, but the flip side of it is they'll say, well, I want you to be successful, but not too successful. Right. Well, whatever too successful means to them.
Yeah. Whatever that is.
Yeah. Can you dip into that at all? Whether that be, the marketing end of it, kind of the maybe a small minority of people that sometimes don't like when breweries get big. Do you have any thoughts on that? That you want to share?
I've got some thoughts. Yeah, I've made craft beer a career. I've got plenty of thoughts. This could be one
that we gloss over too. So.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's your analogy to music is the one I always go to. It's a very similar feel from the fan side. Everybody's got their small local band that they saw back when, before they were big, and oh, you think they're good now? You should have heard them in this, 100-person venue back in 2001. Craft beer is the same way. Everybody loves their local pub, as they should. It's pubs forever have been the place where a community gets together, and there's nothing more local than a bar and a craft brewery. So it's, I understand that passion, and the people want to take ownership of the thing they're excited about. So when it grows and suddenly everybody else is in on the secret, and everybody else has access to the same awesome beers, it's suddenly you don't feel as cool, and you're not as special because you're the only one that can get your hands on this.
Sure.
You can just look at any of the alcohol secondary markets, be it craft beer or bourbon or whatever. There's a flourishing market of people just getting hard to find beers and shipping them across the country because, well, I can't get it, so I want to try it, right? I gotta check in on Untapped and say I've had it, right? That whole thing. And yeah, you see a lot of hype breweries. They're great. The nerds love them when they're small and they can do no wrong. And then they grow and they scale and they become regional brewers. And then people are like, oh, they sold out. No, the beer's not as good, and blah, blah, blah. Sometimes that's true.
Well, sometimes the reality is sometimes it's when you start getting bigger, you can actually make the beer you want to be making. Your quality control is better. You get access to all these different things. That's one of my experiences right now with this past week at Sonder. It's wild. Chase has a background from New Glarus. He spent a ton of time at New Glarus, and they make a ton of beer. And so to see the stuff that he's implemented in that brewery there, me coming from primarily a pub side, you walk into that and you're like, oh man, dude, I can do things so many different ways. I can be more efficient. I can be cleaner. I can be sterile. You know, like things like that actually start to come into play. And so sometimes that's the ironic thing where, you know, a lot of times, I mean, it's at least possible as places grow, they're probably making the beer they actually want to be making, and potentially it's a technically better beer than it was before. You know?
Yeah.
So,
and quality means two different things depending on your size. When you're a tiny little brewery and you never brew the same thing twice and you make whatever you want, quality is just making delicious beer every time.
Yes.
When you're a regional brewery and you've got flagships, quality is consistency.
Yeah.
It's about making the same beer the same every single time. And it's as good every single time, no matter who has it, wherever they have it. And that's a completely different skill set from just making tasty recipes and making delicious beer. Especially when you're not the only one brewing it, you've got a team of, 15 doing it, and all 15 of them need to, be aligned and have the same training to make the same beer, and it's a totally different game. But that's I think where regional breweries kind of can settle into a good place. And and you talk about your Bells and your Founders and your Firestones and like big breweries, right? They're fans, they're beer nerds from the early days. Oh, they sold out, whatever. They're adored in craft. People look up to them. Obviously, they still sell a ton of beer because they never gave up on quality.
Sure.
They grew and, they made money and they spent money, but they never gave up on quality. They're always striving to be better. They're always striving to innovate. And so after you fall out of fandom with the nerds and then you get big, but then you kind of get into this new zone where you just become the go-to beer.
Sure.
Right. And that's kind of, where we see Truth is these days. Our flagship IPA, it's everywhere. And, you're looking at, 20, 30 beer taps, a bunch of new breweries you've never heard of, a bunch of weird new styles that you've never heard of. Okay, do I really want to spend $7-8 on something that might be good?
Sure.
Or do I just want something I know is going to be good?
Dude, you're segueing perfectly for me here, because that was kind of the next thing I wanted to get into. We've been referencing Truth, which is your flagship IPA, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I do think that's kind of been a cornerstone for your brewery. And you are absolutely correct. You cannot walk into a place in the greater Cincinnati area, at the very least. So I only moved down here a few years ago, but anytime you go into a place, there's a Truth handle, man. It's you guys have some intense hands out into the market with that beer, man. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. So can you talk to me a little bit about kind of creating I mean, really that's a big brand, creating a big brand like that. Kind of what goes into creating a brand like Truth?
I mean, there's kind of, it takes the three main pillars of any craft brewery. It's production, marketing, and sales. All three need to be kicking ass and doing their job for it to work. And, it starts in the brew house, quality beer. The recipe isn't, we don't have secret recipes or anything. If I've always said, if you can brew Truth better than us, go ahead.
Sure.
Give it your best shot. I'll share the recipe.
Sure.
So it's about making consistent, high quality IPA every single time. And then, from there, it's got the Truth brand backed by the Rhinegeist brand, which, another big player in our success has just been such a strong brand identity. Obviously the logo is iconic at this point. And shout out to our marketing director Tracy. She has protected the brand, and it's like her child. And she never dilutes it, never lets it into anybody else's hands to be mishandled. So it's just owning that presence. Sure. And then the sales piece, which in Cincinnati and Columbus for us is all self-distribution. That's just having people in the market and always checking on freshness and always checking in with accounts to say, how are things going? Is it selling? What do you think? And that's one of the things that's made it, you can go anywhere. It's because we self-distribute down here, and we've literally got 2 or 3 times the point of contact that anybody else that's going through a traditional wholesaler has.
And that's one of those things.
We've also got the drivers, and
Yeah, and really at that point, I mean, when we were talking about the scaling thing, and in so many ways, I mean, you're really talking about a logistics business at this point. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? That's one of the other things. It's not just the beer, it's not just the sales, it's not just the marketing, but it's a full-on logistics operation, especially when you're talking about being able to self-distro and everything like that. So, yeah, man, that's interesting stuff. So, kind of looking in a different direction, kind of looking forward, maybe into the present, into the future a little bit too. There's always different things that hit the market. Can we talk at all about RTDs, where you think kind of craft beer is trending into the next few years? It sounds maybe like a little bit of a crystal ball thing, but we're usually trying to stay. Yeah, my thought is this on some level. If you're always there's plenty of room for looking at sales data. Obviously, sales data is invaluable, but you also don't want to be the last person into the pool when it comes to new styles that are hitting, and you have to try to be careful. But you also want to be able to hit with something that might be a little bit more cutting edge. So just in general, any thoughts as far as what we're looking at in the beer space coming up in the next few years?
Yeah, I mean, anyone that studies history always knows what's going to happen in the future, because history repeats itself over and over. That's one thing you can count on. So what we're seeing right now is a generational shift. The last, 10, 15 years of the golden age of craft, meteoric growth, anybody that opened a brewery was successful. You couldn't go wrong. That's because millennials were all about craft. They were bought in, as they came out of college, got jobs, started making money, craft was their thing. They were all about it. And now that millennials are getting older, starting families, moving to the suburbs, drinking less just because they've got kids and they're busy, combination of age and time, you're just not going to hit beer as hard as you did. And so everyone's starting to look to Gen Z, like, oh, okay, how do we get Gen Z into craft? Well, what did your dad drink? Are you drinking the same beer? I'm guessing the answer is no.
Correct.
Right? Your dad drank big domestic or, whatever. And that's what you're seeing now. Like Gen Z is not going to drink what their parents drank. And every generation is a little bit different. And if you go back a couple more generations, that's where it starts. Craft started with a bunch of baby boomers in the 70s and early 80s, getting into home brewing and legalizing home brewing, and then getting into craft beer, and then there was a bubble in the 90s when Gen X came up and said, I'm not into craft, the yuppies were drinking cocktails and wine coolers and that kind of stuff. Zima, Smirnoff, and so there was this already happened in craft. There was a bubble in the late 90s. A bunch of breweries, went IPO and then went out of business. And, there's a bunch of articles and books about it. So anyone who remembers that kind of knew this was going to come eventually. I think it got accelerated by COVID, right? The industry hit a wall because it is so on premise and it's majority brew pubs, and they all got shut down and had all these restrictions. But you could see the early warning signs in 2016, 2017, 2018. The big domestic or big national craft brewers were slowing down. Big domestic brewers were buying them up left and right to try to control the shelf space and get exclusivity and things like that. So you could kind of see it coming. So what I think we're in for the next 5 to 10 years is slow growth, if any, for craft beer. And then I think, after that, once the next generation comes up, I think there's going to be an opportunity for craft to be big again. But yeah, for the next 10 years, it's going to be tough.
Sure.
A bunch of breweries are going to sell, they're going to merge, they're going to go out of business. And a bunch of them are going to be successful. And, you can already look at the BA statistics now. Local brew pubs are doing just fine. There's still a bunch of them opening. So if you have a neighborhood that doesn't have a brewery, you can open a brewery. And if you're smart and willing to work hard and pinch some pennies, you can be successful. You're not going to see a lot of them growing into regional brewery status, but you can have a successful brew pub. But yeah, for those of us that are regionals, it's going to be a combination of a lot of factors of how much debt do you have, how strong is your brand, what's your sales strategy, are you maintaining quality, and all of those things coming together is going to dictate how successful you are in the next decade.
Sure.
To that end, a lot of people are becoming craft beverage companies. Okay, people aren't buying craft beer, we'll make what they are buying. So a lot of people are getting into RTDs, which is ready to drink cocktail, which kind of all that's getting muddied with all of this. There's RTDs versus FMBs versus wine coolers, and there's how they're taxed by the TTB versus how they're communicated at the shelf versus how.
And what are those two other beverages that you just mentioned? Wine coolers,
wine coolers. We know what those are, right? It's flavored wine, commodity wine. And then FMBs are flavored malt beverages.
For sure.
So, Zima, Smirnoff Ice, those are classic FMBs. Twisted Tea is an FMB. Most of your seltzers are all FMBs for the most part. And there's some weird rules around technically being an FMB according to TTB versus not. And it's a lot of legal stuff, but
sure.
The short answer is anything malt based or sugar based. And then RTD is anything with spirits. Mm-hmm. So all of your ready to drink cocktails, margaritas in a can, rum and cokes, Jack and Cokes, all that kind of stuff, prepackaged, ready to drink.
Sure.
But being spirits based is where the alcohol comes from. That's the key piece of that. And then you have things like High Noon that are blending all those together because it's owned by Gallo, which is the largest winery in the world. It is a spirit-based cocktail, but they're calling themselves a seltzer.
Yes.
Which is an FMB. So
Sure.
I think that's a great example of what perfectly kind of sums up alcoholic beverage right now. It's a lot of blurring categories intentionally to try to capture as many, customers and occasions as you can. All that said, if you're going to get out of craft beer, you need to be ready to spend a lot of money in advertising and marketing, because it's a different consumer. Craft consumers are promiscuous. They'll drink all kinds of stuff. They'll have an IPA one night and a Boulevardier the next, and then a Cab Sauv the following night, right?
Yep.
Everybody else outside of craft is pretty loyal to their drink, right? I drink Bud Light, and that's it. Or I drink Jack Daniels, and that's it, right? So to get outside of craft beer, you've got to really appeal to that consumer who is already loyal to a giant brand that's constantly pushing themselves on that consumer. So to wrestle them away, you've got to spend a lot of money. Craft consumers are unique in that we've trained them over the last 20 years to look for things and always be looking for the next thing and always wonder, what is this style of beer and what's in this can and who's this new brewery. And so you've got this audience that's always you don't need to advertise to them because they want to know what's next and they're looking for it actively. So it's two totally different consumers. And if you don't understand that, you're going to have a hard time, which is why, the seltzer game, a bunch of people got into it and there was only a few really big players. There's White Claw, is Truly, and a few others. Obviously AB had their players, but there were no meaningful craft players that kind of unseated any of those big guys for that reason.
Sure.
And the same is going to be with RTD. Where there's a difference is spirits. Spirits is kind of entering a craft renaissance right now. They're kind of getting into what craft beer was, 15, 20 years ago, where everybody's looking for new spirits. They're looking for new whiskey brands. They're, everybody's talking about what's new and what's good. And, the secondary market is on fire. And there's, you can take bulk spirit from one of the 3 big whiskey makers in the world and you can repackage it and the quality's there. It's not like, if craft brewers could have bought domestic light lager from the big brewers and rebranded it, it would have been a totally different industry, right? Sure. But they were forced to make new things and, reinvent new styles and come up with new stuff because they didn't have that option. Spirits, it's completely the opposite. Most of the spirits out there are buying the bulk spirit and the quality is great. So, it's an easy thing to get into. And, if you sell 40,000 cases, you can sell that brand for, $10 million. Every week there's another one that does it. So spirits is going to be interesting to watch. Again, whether craft brewers getting into spirits works, I think it's up to the brewer and how well they know that customer and their willingness to invest in that. But long story short, the brewers that focus on quality and continue to appeal to the craft consumer are going to be okay.
Sure.
As long as they don't make any dumb business decisions.
Sure. We've been seeing increasingly more and more people that are jumping into the light lager scene. And I know Rhinegeist is doing that right now with Cincy Light. Can you talk to us a little bit about just stylistically what that beer is, kind of what your hopes and goals are for that brand and some things like that?
Yeah, I mean the style's pretty straightforward. There's 3 big players that have been making it for 150 years, and it's 4.2%, 95 to 125 calories, and it's light, it's crushable, very very low hop character, and it is beer that tastes like beer, right? Yeah. It's what most people, it's their first beer experience.
What do you think the challenge is as a craft brewery trying to break into that side of it? Because, it still is, even though Rhinegeist is a large player on the craft side, a regional brewery, the difference in scale between a Bud Miller Coors is still it's still wild.
Yep.
It's still two different games, and you start getting into like a price point discussion as well, right? Because we as craft brewers are used to selling in this ultra premium market, right? And so people are willing to pay high for that, but there's going to be challenges where you're making a beer that is comparable or better, well, whatever it is. But I mean, you're making that beer style, and you can't necessarily always expect to still be charging what you're charging for your Super Supreme 4-packs of high gravity adjunct beer and everything like that. Yeah, I mean, what are your thoughts on kind of cracking into that market and some of the challenges?
Yeah, I mean, first off, it's quality, right? You can't hide anything in that beer. If the fermentation's off, if your raw materials aren't of a certain quality, if your process isn't of a certain quality, it's going to show. A lot of craft beer styles, especially your smoothie sours and pastry stouts and triple IPAs, you can throw so much flavor at them that a lot of flaws can be hidden and covered up.
Sure.
Light lager, you're not hiding anything. So it's really hard to make a beer, again, as good and as consistent as the big brewers that have been doing it for 150 years.
Sure.
But it's possible. So once you have that, okay, then you're reaching out to a new consumer, right? You're reaching out to somebody that's been drinking Bud Light or Coors Light their whole life, and saying, hey, try this. Why? I'm perfectly happy with the one I've been drinking. Why bother? So you've got to find a way to appeal to that consumer. It starts with price, right? They're not going to pay a penny more for something that's as good. Okay, fine. You make a nice light beer. It's just as good as the one I've been drinking. Why would I pay more for it? Which is why historically craft has had such a hard time cracking the light beer category. So you've got to find, okay, let's match price. Let's line price with domestic. Still, why would I drink that? So you've got to appeal to them in some way that says, no, we've got a story that you care about. We've got a reason for you to drink this versus that. That could be a heritage brand. That, oh, my granddad drank that, or my great granddad drank that. I've heard of that old beer style. That's cool. That's really cool. It's coming back. And you saw that in craft, for the last few years. Obviously Christian Moorline with Hootie and Little Kings. They're the local legends for that, right? They're keeping those beer styles alive. And I'm super excited to see what's going to happen in new hands for those brands. I think it's going to be great. But even in Indiana, Upland was doing Champagne Velvet, right? You kind of got some of these heritage brands coming back. So there's an angle there. Cincy Light for us is taking advantage of the NIL, which is the name, image, likeness, where players are allowed to make money in college, because universities are making a lot of money off of them and the sports they play and how well they do. So that just became legal but a decade ago, but didn't really become relevant until the last couple of years. And you're seeing all these different universities sign up with all these different beers coming out, and so that is what I think the reason to buy for Cincy Light is. Okay, you're into light lager. You want to tailgate with light lager. You want something crushable and tasty. It tastes like beer. Gotcha. Cool. You're in Cincinnati. You want to support UC. Guess what? Buy Cincy Light. You're supporting UC. There's proportion of proceeds that goes to every single case that gets sold. And so it's finding a way to just appeal to that consumer
Sure.
and kind of get top of mind. And that's been huge for us. Like, we didn't know how to get in with light beer. Like, we had Cheetah, which is a nice craft lager, 5%. Got a gold at the World Beer Cup this
I was
year.
about to say, if you didn't say it.
Great lager, right?
Oh, yeah.
One of the best in the world.
Yeah.
So, but it was still doing just okay, right? Because we were still targeting craft consumers, and it wasn't the light lager consumer. But Cincy Light's been able to appeal. It's been massive for us. We're struggling to keep up with demand. It's the biggest new brand launch we've ever had, which is crazy, and certainly unexpected. Going into the year, it wasn't in the plan. The opportunity didn't present itself until the spring. So we kind of fast tracked and just moved as quickly as we could to get ready for football season. And it all kind of came together from a branding perspective and a liquid perspective. And now we're out and we're trying to get out to the market as fast as possible. And it's been fantastic.
That's awesome, man. A few weeks back, I had spoke a little bit on some of the things you see popping up. I know there are some articles in kind of the craft beer world about people talking about brewer burnout. And you're running a large staff. How many people do you have employed there at Rhinegeist?
We're about 300, depending on seasonal staff.
That's awesome, brother. That's awesome. Mm-hmm. So, and these articles are talking about, brewer burnout. You see people talking, some people online. I mean, there's specific pages on Facebook talking about pay me minimum wage to run your entire brewery. That's the name of one page. There's different things like that, people voicing concerns. I believe it's Creature Comforts, that they have some brewers down there that are trying to unionize. There's some interesting things. And then even just getting into the overall concept, the overarching concept of health within our industry. What do you see some of those big issues are, and what are some of your takes on that?
Yeah, I mean, anytime you have an industry where people are passionate about what they do and they really truly care about what they do, you're going to see people taking advantage of it. And it goes both ways. I'm guilty of it, as I'm sure you are. There are weeks you'll spend 70, 80 hours a week in the brewery because you want everything to get done. You want the beer to be perfect. You want to meet all the sales goals and, make sure everything's working well. And you run yourself into burnout because you care so much about it and you want it to be successful, because there's a personal connection. You're not just manufacturing a widget for a giant global company that, whatever. It's a very personal thing, and you get to interact with the customer and say, yeah, I made this beer. And that's awesome. You're enjoying it. It's a very cool feeling. So we as brewers tend to undervalue ourselves because we put value to that cool factor and how fun it is to be in this industry. And then on the flip side, you've got brewery owners and people that take advantage of it and say, well, I've got a line of people out the door that will work for nothing. So if you're not happy, leave. I'll have your job filled tomorrow. Fortunately, that's no longer as prevalent as it used to be back in the day. Part of the reason I started bouncing around the country is because I was a degree brewer. I had formal training and the student loans to show for it. And I couldn't get a job that was over minimum wage, and I was like, I can't do this. So I started to have moving around the country to find better opportunities. And now I think that's happening everywhere. And brewers are standing up and saying, no, I deserve more. I'm giving you more than a 9 to 5. And pay me that way.
Mm-hmm.
But like anything, it takes time. And the whole industry has to come up, and there's a lot of people, and Rhinegeist included, we say, oh, we're better than the industry average. We're better than most. Okay, the bar is really, really low. So you're gonna brag about tripping over a really low bar? Okay, good, cool, but there's more that needs to be done. And we're going through it right now. Obviously, Cincy Light wasn't planned. It was already a busy summer, and we dropped that on top of the busiest months of the year. And yeah, I've got some brewers that are burned out, and the team's feeling it. And you have to go in, and you have to address it. And yeah, some of it is, all right, we need to get creative and start thinking about ways that we can pay people more. And we need to advocate for our staff with ownership to say, I'm sorry, but we need to take a hit to the margin so that we can pay the people that are here, that are trained, that are good at their jobs, to keep them. It takes 4 to 6 months to train a brewer. It's not like we can go out and hire somebody next week and then they're functional and on their own, in 3 days. It's a very complex process, and there's a lot that goes into maintaining a high level of quality. So you have to invest in that. And then, we all work for money. It's a job for everybody, but it's not everything. So in addition to that, you've got to make people feel valued and heard, and you need to make sure they feel like they're part of the process, and they're not just a cog,
sure,
in the machine.
Sure.
So that's a lot of good communication and leadership, and trying to touch base with your team. And something I've recently been very focused on, and I'll be honest, had gotten away from me a little bit with the busy summer. So it's never ending. You always have to be. It's leadership. It's just engaging with your team and making sure they feel like individuals and valued. And to that point, we're putting guardrails on sales and production right now. We're not just opening the faucet on Cincy Light and saying, all right, let's dump as much into the pipeline as we can. We're tactfully pulling back and locking down production schedules and saying, no, we can't audible another batch in this week or next week,
Sure.
Knowing, we might be missing out on some sales. And we might not be fully realizing the opportunity that we have right now. But that's to the benefit of the team, and giving them a break, and recognizing they're overworked, and it's 100 degrees inside the brewery. Take a break.
Yeah.
Let's slow down and think about why we're doing this.
Yeah, definitely, man. That's no, I think you're spot on. And we're gonna shift a little bit and jump into beer, but sometimes I'm a relatively emotional guy. I feel a lot of feelings, Cole, and something I'm just gonna mention is that I always find every time I sit down with somebody for these conversations, I just love having the discussion, and I'm just really just filled with gratitude. Just so all of you know, back there, Cole was probably, when I moved down here 3 years ago, I think Cole was the only brewer I knew potentially for like a year and a half. And he's always gone out of his way to for advice, for a sounding board. And he really is somebody that gives back in that regard. So I'm just super thankful. I'm really glad you made the time, and I'm just really enjoying myself so far. So anyways, yeah, man, I appreciate your time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, man. So let's talk Oktoberfest. I mean, this is the season. The beers have already been out on the shelf. When did October? What is your Oktoberfest brand?
Franz.
When did Franz hit the store shelves?
I want to say it might have actually hit at the end of July.
There you go.
It's
Well,
every year Oktoberfest season seems to creep up a little earlier and earlier.
but I mean, honestly, if people didn't want to be buying it, it wouldn't be hitting the store shelves at that point. You know what I mean? So it hits and it sells. So kind of diving into the style, there's kind of a two-pronged approach people can make with these fest style beers. They can make a little bit more golden versions or a little bit more amber versions. Can you kind of jump into your goal or vision with what Franz, your Oktoberfest beer, looks like for you?
Yeah, so I mean, in modern brewing, Germany included, there are kind of two versions, right? There's your traditional Oktoberfest, which is really a Märzen served during Oktoberfest. Same style, different time of year. And then there's the fest beer, which is a little bit lighter, a little bit higher ABV. Instead of 5 to 5.5, it's 6 to 6.5. So it's got a little more kick. It's a little easier to go down. It's your party beer, your drinking beer. So those are kind of the two avenues you can go these days and kind of call it an Oktoberfest. With Franz, we went, and this was Jim Matt, our original head brewer. This is his recipe. That I'm not going to take credit for any of this, other than keeping it alive this long. So this was his brainchild back in when they first opened in 2013. Obviously, Cincinnati has a huge German heritage. We have the second largest Oktoberfest celebration in the world outside of Munich. So Oktoberfests are huge around here. Most craft brewers do one, and it's like, oh, cool, yeah, Oktoberfest, that's that big German thing, right? It's a totally different thing here in Cincinnati. It is huge, and yeah, people are, licking their lips, waiting for the Oktoberfest season every year, and it never seems to come early enough. So his vision for that beer was more of a traditional Oktoberfest Märzen style, a little bit darker, kind of like an amber, a light amber lager, 5.4% ABV, 20 BU, and that's kind of traditional hopping, middle for a tradition. We've kind of played around with a few of those noble varieties, but we've always kept it noble. And then just a really nice, complex, but drinkable malt bill.
Yeah.
A pale ale base, then with healthy doses of Cara Munich, Munich 1, 2, and even a little Vienna, to just kind of get this really complex aroma and flavor profile of pretzel and bread crust, and just kind of smooth, balanced,
Yeah, and for all of us that are so used to making all these really, hop forward beers and everything like that. I mean, these are real malt forward. This is the real time to flex those malt muscles. And one of the things that I love of what you talked about with those malts that are in there, that range of Munich malt can kind of have, that bread crusty, toasty thing going on. That Vienna, I don't know about you, but sometimes Vienna can be a little bit more, maybe a little bit more into the nutty range. And then you get some of those a little bit of caramel malt in there, and it's just a nice arc of flavor, man. It's awfully nice. So one of my thoughts with a beer like this is kind of the tie-in between finishing gravity on these beers, and then how you're balancing that with IBU. So where does this beer finish out for you? Just ballpark even.
So we like to keep it below 3. It's usually around 2.8.
You're telling me things I love
that's
to hear.
Plato for all of you specific
Yeah.
gravity nuts out there. I'm throwing you for a loop. We work in degrees Plato.
Yeah, so I mean, really, you're looking anywhere from 10, 10, 10, 12 in that range if you're talking specific gravity, and that's music to my ears. Just from a personal standpoint, when you take those beers into that range, you don't have a tremendous amount of sweetness that you need to conquer with that bitterness, right? And I think that's the thing we always talk on here. I think that's one of the components to really elevating the drinkability of a beer, right? You don't have a ton of residual sweetness that's kind of bogging your palate down. You don't have to stack additional bitterness on top of it to balance out that sweetness. So you're not pounding the palate with all these things that's going to make a beer harder to drink, right? So yeah, this is all music to my ears. That's my preferred approach with those beers as well. And even when you're talking about the paler version, and sometimes, that paler version, that fest beer style, it's a little bit darker than Helles, maybe into golden a little bit, but that paler style almost has like this kind of like super Helles element to it, right? It's not like a double Helles or like we think IPA to double IPA, but it is a beefed up Helles a little bit. One thing that I'm curious about is when we talked about those 20 BU in Franz, is that all going in as like a boil hop? Are you reserving anything a little later in the kettle for stuff like that? What's kind of the approach there?
Yeah, we do a 10-minute addition. That's 10 minutes from knockout.
Sure.
So yeah, we do reserve a little bit to try to carry some hop character over. It's not just a bittering addition.
Yeah.
While minimal in the grand scheme of craft beer styles, it is still noticeable when you have a little bit of that noble spiciness and kind of hop character come through. So,
definitely.
A key thing about our version, which I left out, is that it's actually an ale.
Okay.
So yeah, we don't have a traditional fest beer or Oktoberfest, because obviously those are lagers.
Sure.
So in the early days, because they were moving so fast and couldn't make beer fast enough, rather than lager a beer for 2 months and do it the traditional way, they decided to throw the ale yeast at it. And knowing that in the future, we'll do the lager and switch it over, but it was so successful, and now it's become kind of a cult thing every year that we're like, well, people don't want us to mess with it, so we'll keep doing it as an ale.
Sure.
And we're not trying to fool anybody. It's called out as an ale on the can and everything, right? It's kind of our American craft spin on it.
I remember early on, I was making a Kolsch. It was cold fermented, but I mean, I was throwing a British strain at it because that's what I had in house, and I would start it at 60. You know what I mean? And it's one of those things. But I do think it speaks interestingly to, obviously stylistically. If you're really going to dive in on the stylistic side, you would want to throw something lager yeast wise at it. But the flip side is you can make a clean from an ester standpoint, right? Obviously micro too, but you can make a very clean ale, and you end up almost getting into the conversation of what percentage of people are going to know, let alone care, right? And I think sometimes we overemphasize that element of it. And again, if you're coming at it from a stylistic standpoint, that's great. Like there's no issue with that. But yeah, you can definitely turn a beer like that in a clean fashion. One thing that I wanted to ask about, just briefly, because we did talk about the finishing gravity, and as we know that is in so many ways is built into the mash. What kind of mash schedule does a beer like that see? I would kind of assume it's a little bit on the cooler side as opposed to the hotter side.
Yeah. Yeah, so we still do single infusion, just like all of our beers. But yeah, it's a little cooler. It's like 148 is
Mm-hmm.
what we shoot for, whereas most everything else is kind of 152 to 154.
Mm-hmm.
But with how modified malts are these days, the whole like, step mashing and decoction and that whole thing really isn't as relevant as it used to be.
If you're not pulling under modified malt, I mean, if you're
Mhm.
not using under modified malt, because I mean we know that domestic stuff that we're sourcing, first of all, is made for enzyme wise, it's made for light lager, right?
Mhm.
So it's completely jacked up on enzyme. Probably, I mean, we used to joke around about it, but I mean, by the time you get that thing all the way into the mash tun, or whatever your dough and vessel is, you snap your fingers, and probably most of that stuff is converted. I mean, it happens pretty darn fast.
It
You know what
really
I mean?
does.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it really does. So it is one of those things. But if you are sourcing an under modified
Mhm.
domestic malt or European grown malt, that stuff comes into play much more. Definitely.
Mhm.
Definitely.
Yeah.
For
And I
sure.
totally appreciate the people that take on the challenge of doing a traditional decoction with
Sure.
undermodified malt and, hitting it with the low and slow lager and really trying to make a beautiful Oktoberfest. And
Sure.
that's awesome. I think it's great when people do that and do it well.
Sure.
Um, but you can also make very, very tasty beer without that.
Definitely.
And just brewer preference, and I think there's a place for everybody with it.
Sure. Sure. So I kind of on the finishing side for a beer like this, sometimes what we don't talk about when we're making these beers is some of the stuff on the finishing side. So even just like just from a carbonation standpoint, what do you like to get this thing into the can at for a carb level?
So we're pretty standard at we carb to 265. By the time it's in the can, you're at 255 probably.
Sure. Sure.
Um, it floats a little bit, but yeah, I mean, but that's kind of across the board. We don't necessarily carb too many things outside of that range. Um, just again, when you're at scale and running a packaging line, having individual carb levels for each brand is a process nightmare.
Sure.
It's
Sure.
really hard to maintain quality when you're constantly jerking, your set points around on your can line as far as
Definitely.
undercover gassing and head pressure and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, we try to streamline as much as we can with few things falling outside of that.
Sure. Well, I have a question that came in from the chat. Jason Spiegel, who is excited for you to be on. He's been commenting on a few things, but he said if you have time and we can just kind of take a little bit of a broad overview on it potentially. He said if you have time, can you talk about the recipe slash process for Penguin? Penguin apparently is a blonde stout that you guys do. Can you give
Yes.
us any thoughts on that beer?
Yeah, that was a fun. It was actually a collaboration brew we did with an LA brewery called Three Weavers.
Okay.
Um, so the story behind that one, so the guy that actually told me to reach out to Bryant about working at Rhinegeist, his name was Omar. He worked with us at Golden Road, and then was the first sales guy for Three Weavers back in the day. He came out for the first Hopgeist, which was one of Rhinegeist's early beer fests.
Mm.
And he was like, "Oh man, these guys are just blowing it away, and they're doing crazy stuff." And he's like, "Man, you gotta reach out. You gotta check them out." And so he was kind of the inspiration and the one that pushed me to come out here. And oddly enough, he has a fear of penguins, like terrible penguins. He was attacked by one as a child. And
where the hell did he live?
LA, born and raised in LA. I guess went to a zoo and there's a penguin encounter and came at him. And he's just been terrified of penguins ever since. And it's obviously a running joke because who's afraid of penguins?
Sure.
So yeah, obviously when we collabed with him, we were like, well, we have to call this thing Penguin, and we got a bunch of people dressed up in penguin suits and ran around. It was pretty fun day. But anyway, yeah, it was a blonde stout, which was a style that kind of came out in 2012, 2013, at least when I was in LA at that time. It was making the rounds. There was a really good version that Evan Price, who now owns Green Cheek, which is a great brewery. If you ever had a chance to check out their stuff, fantastic beers. At the time, he was at Noble Brewing in Anaheim, and he had this beer called Naughty Sauce, which is a blonde stout. And it's essentially you're trying to recreate a stout without the color, right? You want the flavor, you want the mouthfeel without throwing a bunch of roast malt in and making it black. So it's kind of, I think it's the grandfather of pastry stouts, really, because it was one of the first styles that really forced you to throw a bunch of other adjuncts in and have those really drive the flavor. And there was, people were doing it a couple of different ways. Some people, were using roast husk instead of roast malt to kind of get the flavor without as much color pickup. And then a lot of people were just, let's go coffee, and to add that roastiness. And then obviously lactose to carry that kind of creaminess. And yeah, that's just kind of how the style was born. So our take was that it was kind of a coffee and lactose blonde stout. It was great. One of our first partnerships with Deeper Roots as well. Fantastic coffee roaster. It's the house coffee at Rhinegeist. And yeah, so it's kind of an interesting style where you're just trying to trick the brain. What your eye sees is not the flavor and the aroma.
Sure, and I know some people have used different adjuncts in that, and I've heard people using anything of like a light hand with something like anise to kind of fill that back. People trying to maybe even incorporate a little oak, because sometimes stout definitely goes obviously into the barrel aged side as well, right? Mm-hmm. So just anything familiar that you can fold in that's not going to be pushing the color side of it, right? So you can still maintain, it's like that optical, that trick thing going on. I know sometimes people use vanilla. So yeah, that's a fun little thing that some people work with. And thanks, John, for the question. I think right now we're gonna wrap, Cole. Just kind of before we go, are there any things that Rhinegeist has coming up on the horizon? Maybe some seasonal things. I know we've talked Truth, we've talked Franz, we've talked Cincy Light. So maybe some of the stuff rolling on into fall, into Christmas season. And if you can tell us where we can find Rhinegeist beer.
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned crumb cake. That's going to make a little quick return post Franz, and then of course Dad, which is our holiday ale that is not a spiced Christmas ale. It is just a hoppy kind of holiday beer, celebration from Sierra Nevada is kind of the inspiration for that. And like Franz, that one just every year, we don't have to mess with it. People wait for it and they crush it. We've got Raven, which me and all the brew team are very excited for. That is a rye export stout. So kind of a great 6.8% ABV stout with a healthy dose of rye malt. So it's got a little spice, plenty of body and heft. That's going to be hitting cans, carry you through the cold winter. So really excited for that one. And then, yeah, I mean, it's just kind of get through the back half of the year, see what Cincy Light does, and just kind of ride that wave. And then obviously you can find us if you're in Ohio, pretty much anywhere. Same with Northern Kentucky and Indiana. We're in 10 states, kind of around the Great Lakes, as far south as Tennessee, and as far north as Wisconsin, all the way through Michigan, Pennsylvania. So
beautiful,
yeah,
man.
your local beer spot, and you should see us on the shelf.
Nice. Well, hey, listen, once again, I want to thank you for coming on. This was really a blast. There's been some positive feedback in the chat of being able to look at things through a little different lens that there's not a whole ton of people that can provide insight into. So that was really great. So yeah, thanks so much, everybody out there. Please check out Rhinegeist. Give their beers a try if you haven't already. Also, we did talk about some of the marketing, branding stuff. Their merch is absolutely awesome. They've got great gear as well. And then, of course, finally, thank you to our wonderful sponsor, Blickman Pro Brewing. And yes, I will have the September live stream. I have shifted this up. I'm going to be doing that this Monday. So be checking that out and get your questions in for that. And Cole, once again, man, thanks so much for coming on and sharing some of your story with us, brother.
Absolutely. Happy to chat and hang out. Always a good time.
Thanks, man. I'm going to cut the live stream and then I'll chat with you a second once we're off. Thanks again, brother.
Cool.
All right. Bye.